The history of any country is always bound with unrevealed secrets, sacred places and riddles which scientists have been trying to solve for decades. Kazakhstan is an ancient land. Its history keeps a lot of glorious names, events and facts, some of which are still covered with myths and legends. The Time Puzzle crew tries to understand the intricacies of ancient and modern mysteries of history, traveling around the country and visiting its most amazing corners. In this episode, Repository of History and Chamber of Ghosts. Solving any secrets of history, researchers often fall back on museums, libraries and archives. But in addition to unique documents, photographs and video recordings, one can also find there something that cannot be explained, proved or disproved. In the world press, we often see headlines saying that a ghost has been seen in some museum. Workers of libraries claim that books live their lives and change their places on the shelves independently. People hear footsteps and feel the presence of something otherworldly in the archives. The Central State Archive of Film and Photo Documents and Sound Records of the Republic of Kazakhstan is also no exception. What is going on within these walls? When you work in the archive, like it or not, you sometimes get a goosebump. What rare records are found in the repositories of the archive? Of course, sometimes there are also pleasant findings. The history of the country, frozen in the frame. The oldest film documents date back to 1925. What else except for historical chronicles and photographs can be found in the archive? Watch right now. When I'm creating an episode, I often go to the archives. Only there I can find the documents, photos and footage I need. One day I talked to one visitor who assured me that there were inexplicable things happening in the archives. He was working with old photographs and suddenly felt as if someone was behind his back and breathed on his neck. What ghosts wander in the corridors of the archives? I decided to explore this and find out what other secrets are hidden there. My name is Andrei Slozhin. It is the Time Puzzle. According to people who come to the archives in order to search for and study any material, strange things are happening here. In the corridors and halls of the building, people hear footsteps, they feel the presence of someone or something. Noticing such activity, they come to the archive staff with questions. However, most of them receive an answer that it could be a draft or creaking old parquet. There is no need to frighten people. But what Yenlig Tolkibaeva told the Time Puzzle crew she cannot explain like this.
Зерттеушілеріміз сол естіген кісі айтады да, бұл не? Мен айттым, сіз уайымдамаңыз. Біреу келе жатыр ма дейді, мен айттым.
Some visitors ask, what was it? Who's coming? And I answer, do not worry, everything is fine. It's our local boogies. Do not be afraid. They ask, is it always like that? Yes, constantly, almost every day. We're already used to it. Most often in the morning and in the evening. At lunch we do not hear them. That is, early in the morning between 8 and 9 a.m. or in the evening after 5. And if we stay at work after 6, then we really get scared. And I always turn on the light everywhere, even in the corridor. Then I leave the office. I barely reach the stairs. It is very scary to walk. In order to understand whose steps that visitors hear there, I need to start by studying the materials that are stored in the archives. Maybe there is something connected with them. A person who has worked here for several decades, the head of the reading room, Ludmila Gusakova, is going to help me. The oldest film documents date back to 1925. They include such films as Turksib, Way of Life of Kazakhs, Golden Shores, Alma-Ata, To You the Front, and other films. These films were silent and they were filmed on nitrofilm. It's a combustible film. In the 1970s, it became necessary to change this nitrofilm to triacetate base. The documents were transferred, but it seems like it was a mistake. But nevertheless, the documents were transferred to a non-flammable basis.
Особый интерес у меня вызвал режиссер Виктор Турин и его фильм «Турксиб».
I was especially interested in the director Victor Turin and his film Turksib. Few people know, but this documentary was one of the first filmed in Soviet Kazakhstan. It shows a large-scale construction of a railroad connecting Siberia and Central Asia. Foreign documentalists highly appreciate the work of Turin for the innovation of photography and the uniqueness of visual material. Although the film was banned in the Soviet Union, citing lack of propaganda. And maybe the past of the director was unsuitable for the worker peasant country. The biology of Turin is very unusual. Viktor Alexandrovich was born in 1895 in St. Petersburg. He studied at the theater school. In 1912, Turin went to the United States to relatives in Boston, and in 1913 entered Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And then graduated with honors in 1916. After that, for 5 years, he worked in Hollywood as an actor and screenwriter. After the October Revolution, he returned to Russia and began his career as a director. In spite of a sufficient number of other works, Turin is called one film director. Nevertheless, it was Turksib which entered the list of films of great importance for the history and recommended for viewing by Harvard University. The film of Viktor Turin is very interesting for us. It was filmed in 1929, Vostok Kino Studio. It is a silent movie, but nevertheless the film is among the 50 best documentaries of the 20th century. The entire stage of construction, from beginning to end, was filmed. By the way, in this film there is a small storyline of early Almaty, early Alma-Ata, 1929. Could this be the ghost of Turin? I don't think so. After all, the director died more than 70 years ago in Moscow. But he is not the only person whose work is stored in the archives. Alla Siitova, who was the director of the archives for 23 years and now went on a well-deserved rest, told us about another outstanding person, or rather about unexplainable phenomena associated with his name.
Документы Сергея Ивановича Калмыкова, я их до сих пор боюсь смотреть.
I'm still afraid to look at the documents of Sergei Ivanovich Kalmykov. You know, they have crazy energy. These documents always disappear. We were shooting the movie. I went out into the street. It is about a brilliant artist whose paintings are now sold at all the auctions of the world for the same money as the paintings of Monet, Renoir and all Impressionists.
В хранилище всегда происходило что-то невероятное.
Something incredible always happened in the archives. The camera would turn off. We could not find any page that we've just filmed. We all used to say it came to the point that the operator or the director was saying, "Sergei Ivanovich, did we do something wrong? We're leaving now." We left, and only the next day the shooting could continue. This is absolute truth. And everyone knows about this magnetism of documents. Sergei Kalmykov was so mysterious a person that around him there is still a huge number of legends. It is still unknown where his grave is. A lot of questions are raised also by the fact whether he was mentally ill or was it his next image. Historians of the whole world are still struggling with the mystery of his genius. And that case in the archives perhaps was another attempt to reveal the secret of the artist, which did not lead to success.
Когда ты работаешь в хранилище, Вот хочешь, не хочешь, у тебя иногда...
When you work in the archives, like it or not, you sometimes get a goosebump because something is happening there. Only the employees of the archives have access to the repository. This place can be called its heart. Here, with strict observance of humidity and a certain temperature, films, audio recordings and photographs of past years are stored. Each storage unit has its own serial number and a specific location on the shelf. There is strict accountability, and this order is observed by each and every person. The head of the archives, Shina Saribaeva, told us about this.
У нас кинодокументов около 50 тысяч.
We have about 50,000 film documents, about 500,000 photo documents, about 30,000 phono documents. Naturally, when they arrive at the state storage, the recruitment department is engaged in the description of those documents.
Все описывается, что
Everything should be described. What is in this document? What image? Or what sound?
информация на
All information is on paper so that in the future cards could be created in the department for use for researchers, so that they could find everything in a systematized catalog.
каталоге.
Based on this principle, they store all historical data carriers beginning from photos and finishing with films. However, the film stock receives special attention here.
Пленка – это очень уязвимый носитель. И только потому, что это
The film is a very vulnerable data storage.
отличный.
And only because it is completely different from paper carriers, it is important to preserve the film.
Именно пленку. Это
All this must be constantly cleaned, preserved and restored. Only in this case the documents will be saved.
документы сохранятся.
A unique film about an elephant is stored in the archives, which became famous throughout the world. It is believed that the elephant named Batir was able to imitate human voices, barking dogs, singing birds. This feature was noted in 1977 by the employees of the zoo. Rumors on the unique elephant flew immediately, but few people know that the elephant Batir fell silent after one incident.
В архиве есть документальный фильм «Почему Батыр не поет» и хроника. Это алматинский
In the archives, there is a documentary, Why Batir Does Not Sing. This is the Almaty Zoo. There was a baby elephant Batir in our zoo, and everyone said that he was a talking elephant. And one day filmmakers caught it on video. It was truth. Then people became interested. It really sounded like speech. Then Batir was transported to Karaganda. Apparently, he did not like the climate and he stopped talking there. Thanks to the careful approach in the work of the archives, the employees managed to save one more unique record which was discovered quite by accident. But in the end, it was this newsreel that contributed to the triumph of historical justice.
В архиве случаются и приятные находки, естественно, потому что, несмотря на то, что документы
Of course, sometimes there are also pleasant findings, because despite the fact that the documents are modern, they are accurately described by specialists and employees.
очень много белых пятен, документов, которые еще не до конца.
But as for the early period, there are a lot of blank spots, documents that are not fully described yet, or just some nice, interesting findings. For example, on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the victory, the archives prepared materials for the Kabar TV channel, and the archivists found a chronicle of Kioaz Dospanova, a pilot who had committed 200 sorties. Nobody knew about her, she did not have any awards. We released this material on the anniversary of victory. It was on air. This material was seen by the president and he said, how can it happen that the country does not know its heroes? And then of course people paid attention to her. She received awards. Kioaz Dospanova was the first Kazakh woman aviator. Her path to aviation was difficult and long. However, she still managed to fulfill her dream, to fly the plane. She served in the famous regiment of Maria Raskova, which was called Night Witches by the enemies. The Great Patriotic War undoubtedly influenced the fate of millions of people. By the way, the archives of film and photo documents owes its creation to it too.
В 1943 году в режиме эвакуации сюда
In 1943, during the evacuation, all the cultural institutions of the country were concentrated in Alma-Ata, including Mosfilm, Lenfilm and Center Nauch Film, as far as I know.
Центр научный. Для того, чтобы сохранить
In order to preserve unique documents on the history of our state, of the Great Patriotic War, on the participation of Kazakhstanis and Kazakhstan, of the fact that, after all, they also contributed to the victory of the Soviet Union. To preserve all these unique frames, it was necessary to create an archive, a specialized archive of film and photo documents. It began to work as early as April the 1st, 1943. According to the regulations, the Central Republican State Archives of Film, Photo and Phono Documents was a research institution and was under the jurisdiction of the Archives Department of the NKVD of Kazakhstan. All the photographs, films and audio tapes created on the territory of the Republic and having political, historical or cultural significance were brought to the archives.
Возможно, что именно благодаря таким записям
It is possible that thanks to such records on which the tragic moments of the war are depicted, the energy that prevents normal work both for the visitors and the archives was generated in the archive.
Бұл аяқтың дыбысын бізге келетін зерттеушілерде бір-екі
The sounds of footsteps are constantly heard by our visitors. They come here to work, to search.
не таңертеңгі
There are two scientists who try to come as early as possible to read and look at archival documents. They also heard these sounds of steps.
естіді. Ол да естіді, ол да былай күтті біреу кеп
It often happened after 5 p.m. It turns out that one of those people thought that someone was coming. He looked around and waited for someone to drop by. But there was no one. Even my colleague Ludmila Vasilievna said that she also heard it.
естеймін деп айтады да ол.
She asked me, Yanlik, do you also hear strange sounds?
Или басқа біреу
When I stay up late, I hear footsteps and I think that you are coming back.
біз енді
But it was not you. Therefore, we all believe that there are otherworldly creatures in our archives.
түсінеміз архивте. Енді ондай тылсым күштің болмауы мүмкін емес, өйткені бізде қаншама документ.
I think that this is not even surprising. After all, there are so many old documents and materials stored here.
Адамның энергетикасы
Each of them is saturated with the energy of people who lived before us. Different fates, different lives. They are still with us.
мүлде мүмкін емес деп есептеймін.
Different people come to the state archives of film and photo documents, historians of local law, students, journalists, various researchers. Here you can find a variety of materials for a variety of purposes. Local historian Nela Buketova is one of the most loyal visitors to the archive. She spent many years in these walls. As Nela tells, she literally fell in love with this institution and made friends with the team. The archive became her second home. I met the girls literally from the first days as I began to work. Ludmila Vasilievna, Alla Fedorovna. I took photos from them and did everything right. I gave references in the book to them. I believe that they are my co-authors. This archive somehow stands out among all. I don't even know whether it has something to do with attitude to people. The main direction of studies of local historian Nelly Buketova is the city of Verny, as well as its architect Paul Godet. She published many articles and books on this subject. Most of the information the local historian got from the archives. The archive stores documents and photographs. But besides that, I do not know. There is something more here, more than the storehouse. When I took the documents, I always felt excitement. And I still can feel it after so many years. Whenever I pick up a document, I have a trembling attitude towards it. I start to imagine how old is this document, who looked at it before me, who wrote it, and now I am working with it.
Может быть, в архиве ходят призраки неизвестных.
Maybe there are ghosts of unknown authors who once created these materials. After all, there are many photographs of nameless photographers, although their value does not change because of this fact. I remember the first photo for my first book, Alma-Ata and its Citizens. I took the first photo from the archives. They had irrigation ditch. I do not know for sure, but it could be the period of Verney or the beginning of the Soviet era. When I found that photo there, I didn't even know why would I need it, but nevertheless I took it. But then I found a place in the book for it. Of course, the majority of the archive's funds are the photo documents, more than 250,000 negatives, paper photographs and photographs on glass plates. They are also stored very carefully and under special conditions. After all, they are really unique frames for historians.
Когда мы говорим о ранних фотодокументах,
When we are talking about early photo documents, I want to speak well of the Verney photographer Pavel
то
Labin.
есть благодаря ему мы
Thanks to him, we can see how the city of Verney looked like beginning from 1887.
У нас даже есть фотография, где он стоит рядом с
We even have a photo where he stands next to his photo studio or his workshop, which was somewhere in the vicinity of the present bathhouse Arasan.
благодаря вот ему мы можем
Thanks to him, we can see how people looked like, how the streets looked like, what apples were in Verney. He made photos of the earthquake in Verney too. That is, the governor's house was destroyed. He shot the ruins of this house.
затем по улице,
Then along the present Kunaev Street, there was a crust structure more than 1.5 meters deep.
то есть он снял
He took the photo of the moment when a person got into this crevice.
щелину, да, и
And the moment that the photographer took a picture, as soon as the person left the crevice, the earth converged. No less large fund is the audio recordings, or as it is called in the archive, phono documents. Anyone has the opportunity to listen to the works of great composers and singers of Kazakhstan. These records are stored on various media, starting from wax rollers and ending with a magnetic film. Sayan Akmoldai, specialist in the digitalization of phono documents, described the most unique of them.
Бұл жерде магниттік пленкалар, одан кейін жаңағы 1939 жылдардан бері қарай келе жатқан грамм пластинктер өте көп саны. Мына аудио жазбаларға байланысты айтып отыр.
There are magnetic films as well as records made since 1939. We have a lot of them. I'm talking about audio recordings. In 1939, the voices of many our singers and dombura players, folk instrument bands were recorded. And if we talk about films, then they're very old. There are a lot of them. The most valuable films are stored separately. There are records from 1919 to 1925 among them.
Таспаларды біз бөлек сақтаймыз. Оның ішінде 1925 жыл бар.
If we talk about writers and poets, there are Tahir Jarokov, Gabidan Mustafin, Gabid Musrapov. They specially came to the Almaty recording studio in order to read out their poems. Also, Mukagali Makatayev in 1967 recorded his voice. These films are kept by us.
Өлеңдерін оқығаны Мұқағали Мақатаев, мысалға 1967 жылдары жазылған таспалары қалған.
There is a speculation that the sound of the phonograph record is much cleaner than other carriers. It is not known for sure when this opinion was formed. However, as the sound engineers say, the purest sound can be obtained only if it is recorded on a magnetic tape.
Осы архивке жұмысқа келгенде, бұрын мен пластинкадан естігем Әміре Қашаубаевтың дауысын. Енді магниттік пленкадан естіп, мен қайран.
For example, when I came to work in these archives, I had previously heard Amre Kashalbayev's voice on the phonograph record. Here I heard it on a magnetic tape. I was very surprised. The dombra was not audible on the record, but I could hear it on the magnetic tape. The next material, very valuable, it is the interview of Baujan Mamishuli. He recalled the years of the Great Patriotic War, all the hardships and privations that he experienced. Also, he told about the times when he served in Siberia. There he also had a hard time. Baujan Mamishuli also reads poetry in his own voice. We have it too.
Содан кейін өзінің Бауыржан Момышұлының өзінің өз даусымен оқыған өлеңдері.
Мы, панфиловцы, гордимся, что именно мы, панфиловцы, мы воевали под командованием этого скромного, тихого, умного, замечательного русского генерала Ивана Васильевича Панфилова.
Бұл жерде Ахан серінің әндері болсын, Біржанның әндері болсын, Біржан Сал. Kumangaz'ның күйлері болсын.
Moreover, the songs of Akan Siri, Bijan Sal, Kumangaz's Kuiz, even such works which we have not heard about, they are stored here. Many Kazakh folk songs as well as songs from other nations were recorded, but they remain dusty in the archives, unheard. They did not enter any collections. Therefore, I can safely say that in our state archives of film and photo documents and audio records, very valuable materials are stored.
Ең аса құнды дүниелердің көбі болса біздің орталық мемлекеттік кино, фото құжаттар және дыбыс жазбалар мұрағатында сақтаулы.
Рассказывая об истории архива, было бы несправедливо.
Talking about the history of the archives, it would be unfair not to mention those people thanks to whom it reached the world level. Now the director is Tuskin Toybayev. He replaced Alla Fedorovna Siitova, who came here as an ordinary employee in the distant 1978. It was 1978, and then the archive was managed by Biljamal Ramazanova, formerly secretary of the Presidium of the Supreme Council of the KazSSR. That is, she was a Kazakh Georgadze, a woman of amazing intelligence and education. After Biljamal Ramazanova came Sapa Bayjanov, professional journalist, intellectual and cultured person. I cannot help but recall Marat Kasanayev. When I came to the archives, I was accepted, as I already said, by Biljamal Ramazanovna. Well, she was the main commander-in-chief. In general, the director of the archives was Flora Davletkozhaeva, professional archivist, who graduated from Moscow Institute for History and Archives. Then in general, we had a lot of graduates of the History and Archive Institute in the industry. It was great, but it also was a bar which we still had to reach. We had to catch up not only with people. The archives itself also needed equipment. The equipment was old-fashioned, often it was inherited by the archives from other organizations. There was no chance of the preservation and transfer of the documents to more modern media.
Микшерские плиты для прослушивания звукозаписи тоже были.
Mixers for listening to sound recordings were also second-hand. We got them together with the radio. All this had to be changed, and we started slowly. Well, at first it was slowly. Then somehow it happened that thanks to my public activities, I traveled the whole world. And it turned out that I was in those archives, which became an example for me. Well, if somewhere there is such an archive which is technically equipped, in America, in France, in Germany, why cannot we have it? So I set my heart upon that. It was somewhere in the late 90s. The 90s were a difficult time for everyone in the post-Soviet space. Many were left without means of subsistence. The archives was simply forgotten. And only the love for history and their work, the dedication of the staff of this institution, helped to preserve those valuable photographs, frames of archival photography and unique audio recordings. In the 90s, we had so much else to do, and the state forgot about the archives. This must be admitted. This is an absolutely objective reality. We just saved the documents. We did not allow them to freeze because the heating was switched off. We worked here in jackets, coats and fur coats because our hands were cold. And we worked no matter what. And most importantly, we saved the negatives. During the fierce heat, we did not have any air conditioning system. We ran with the basins and turned this spraying off water on. We moistened it somehow. That is, we did everything to save the documents.
В конце концов,
In the end, the situation in the country was improving. The archives began to receive funds. The cooling and humidifying systems were installed, as well as a modern fire safety system. The archive reached a new level, and the researchers began to come here.
Нигде и никогда нельзя увидеть то, что ты можешь увидеть в архиве.
Nowhere and never you can see what you can see in the archives. You can look closely at everything. People come to us with a request to find a grandmother's and grandfather's wedding, or even great-grandmother's and great-grandfather, which are 60 to 70 years old. And just imagine the joy of these people when they find and see young grandparents, great-grandmothers, great-grandfathers on the screen.
Дедушек, прабабушек, дедушек.
There are tears in their eyes.
Глаза.
Of course, as in any work, archivists also deal with funny surprises. According to the data of the archive staff, data relates to artists most often requested here. On the second place are inquiries about the history of this or that city or person. There are those who want to find references to their ancestors. But sometimes there are situations when visitors make such requests which are simply unrealistic.
Енді кішкене ақылға қонымсыздау запростар болып жатады, сұраныстар болып жатады. Кісі келеді де маған Абылай ханның.
Sometimes we get crazy requests. For example, a person comes and asks for a photograph of Ablai Khan or Kumangazi. It is clear that in those days there were no photographs. They do not understand this, but we just try to explain to them that there were no cameras back then.
Жаңағы камера болған жоқ дегенде біз түсіндіріп айтамыз.
это, конечно, все комичные ситуации в работе.
These, of course, are comical situations in the work of the archive staff. But let's go back to the stories which make us shiver and which, in fact, brought me here. Up to this moment, I personally met nothing incredible and otherworldly. But here's what else Yandik Tolkibaeva told me.
Былтыр 2017 жылдың қыс мезгілі болатын. Таңертең мен жұмысқа келдім.
Last year, in 2017, in the winter, I went to work early in the morning. All the windows and doors were closed. Therefore, there was no question of any drought.
Мен киімдерімді
My clothes hung on a hanger.
мен таңертең келдім, киімдерімді ауыстырып жаттым. И бір сәтте сол ілініп тұрған
I was busy with my own affairs, and suddenly it seemed to me that some wind was blowing abruptly,
қатты жел тұрып
or something like that. Someone was running past the hanger. As a result, it was turned the other way.
түзу тұрған киім ілгіш былай жартылай бұрылып қалды. Мен бір
All the clothes hanging on the hanger was waving. For some reason, I did not pay much attention to this, but after a while, this action repeated. It seemed like someone who ran at a high speed touched the hanger.
киім ілгіш қайтадан
It turned around again.
сол сәттен бастап мен бұл жерде бізден бөлек тағы да бір тылсым күш иелері бар.
I was scared, and since then I began to believe in some mysterious forces that live in our archives. So when I come to work, I always greet them, and when I leave, I also say goodbye to our spirits until the next day.
Келесі кездескенше деп айтып кетем.
Throughout the world, there are many evidences of eyewitnesses of the fact that something is going on in the archives or museums, something beyond the bounds of understanding. However, these cases do not have a scientific justification. Nevertheless, archives, museums and libraries, without any exaggeration, can be called magical and sacred places where history is kept. This was said by Gulmira Bilalova, local historian and the employee of the Museum of History of Almaty.
Работа музеев и архивов, она
The museums and archives, they're related to each other. They have one and the same goal. These two institutions. Their goal is the preservation, propaganda, study of our cultural heritage. Therefore, no museum can do without cooperation with the archives. No matter how hard I tried to personally see or hear the ghosts of the archives, I did not succeed. It is possible that local ghosts simply don't want to communicate with me, since I'm a convinced skeptic. Anyway, I managed to learn a lot of incredible and interesting facts. And this is only a small part of what is stored in the archives of film and photo documents and some recordings. This year, the archive is 75 years old. Our film crew congratulates each employee of this institution on the anniversary. It was a time puzzle. My name is Andrei Slozhin. See you.